Well, it's great to have you with us today, and I was wondering if you'd start by introducing yourself for us and telling us what you do here on Scilly.
Yes, with pleasure. My name's Kate Hale, and I'm the curator manager at the local museum, Isles of Scilly Museum. I've been in post incredibly 2 years now, having moved here 3 years ago, so I'm very much a blow-in, and it's an honour and a privilege to be able to be curating the museum, and I have a panel of experts which I'm able to refer to, because my history on the island is reasonably limited, but growing all the time.
Yeah. So if you think about the museum
Yeah.
and all the artefacts you've got in there, what does it tell us about Scillonian culture and the people that have lived here over the centuries?
Yeah, it's an eclectic mix, our collection. I think what always enthralls people who have visited the museum, which was beloved by many locals and visitors alike, was that it had such a broad range of artefacts that it captured in sort of one glance. It was very open plan, and it captured in one glance a very rich tapestry of existence and history on the islands, obviously hugely influenced by its maritime history, but also probably most well known for its prehistoric offer, which is so intense. There's so much prehistory here, considering the size of the islands. I think we've got 237, 238 scheduled monuments, and most of those are prehistoric. I mean, it does come even into the 20th century, but yeah, most of them prehistoric. Lots of entrance graves which are pretty unique to history, to Scilly and to West Cornwall. But it's the intensity of them, and the fact that some of these have disappeared, that we've known about them in the last 500 years from historic records, but they're no longer here because of the rise in sea level. A lot of stuff has disappeared. So we know we sort of go back 4,000 years quite comfortably. We know that Mesolithic man definitely visited, and there's that fascination, isn't there, of that being an outpost. When was it first discovered? How did people get here? And the thinking has changed over recent history, certainly. And it's thought now that because Scilly is visible from Cornwall at times, that those first visitors were intrepid, coracle sailing folk who came over and sort of tested it out, stayed for a while, see if they could eke out a living, and then they think that eventually, probably 4 or 5 extended families moved over with livestock on the coracle, and lived probably in parallel, not a hierarchical society, that they were sort of like settlers that took over. And you can see how those different settlements developed, both in terms of place names and archaeological finds throughout the Bronze Age, Iron Age and onwards. So that's a sort of very much the roots of it, and ever since then it's been a story of comings and goings. Very rich shipwreck history, which probably ticks the visitor box quite quickly, which is why we focused it on the Museum on the Move project, which is a response to the museum having closed a couple of years ago. So we've tried to look at the different shipwrecks on the different islands, and what's brilliant about shipwrecks is that they immediately key you in to all the different cultures and reasons for visiting the islands, right back to the medieval times, where we've got a recent shipwreck discovery in Tresco Channel, which shows that there was a good amount of trade between the islands. Probably at this time Tresco Abbey bringing in wine, and in Santonge pottery. so, you know, you've got quite a sense of that vibrancy. We've got chapels and churches on Tian and St Helens, which suggests that there was quite a developed monastic life, and people coming to the islands specifically to visit those places. And then the other sort of aspects that we particularly focused on in the museum historically was Scilly at war, which played a key point in the First World War, Second World War, and also the Civil War. It was particularly a royalist stronghold, and got into all sorts of argy-bargy and ended up officially being at war with Holland somehow or another, and which apparently we still are, I think. That hasn't been sorted out. So yeah, there's quite a focus on that, and we've also looked at that sort of eking out of life on Scilly. That at times it was hugely tough, particularly the beginning of the 19th century, before Augustus Smith, who took over as Lord Proprietor, came over in the mid-19th century and sort of sorted everyone out, planted field divides, hedges, really up the shipbuilding industry here. That was in response to great poverty on the islands. Prior to that, it was, there was a call out for help from the islanders at a time when they were maybe mythologically living off limpets and kelp making, which was the smelting down of kelp into soda ash for the making of glass and soap, most of it shipped off to Bristol. And that was a significant time, I think, in Scilly's development. Just reaching those depths of poverty made it fragile and at the same time resilient. And to come through that was quite something. Since then, more modern history, we had displays of souvenirs, which I loved. They were alongside the Mesolithic display. We had a case of, souvenirs from the 1930s onwards. And tourism has been hugely, hugely important to the survival and flourishing community that we have now on Scilly, and continues to be the largest industry. In amongst that, in terms of industries, we had the flower farming, which is having a renewal now with internet and postal service. That's been quite nice to see how that's, and it's a beautiful thing to live amongst. So yeah, and so as you can hear, sort of very wide range, but all really interesting, quite unusual and specific to the islands. And the one thing I haven't mentioned is the history of the gigs, the pilot gigs, and how pilotage, so bringing the ships through the islands, particularly in the heyday of sailing ships, was big business, and the ships would, these waters would have been full of ships stopping off to getting water, to getting food, waiting for the weather to change, for the wind to change, so that they could take off over to the continent and beyond. So that was an important thing, and racing out to meet the ships in the pilot gigs. The first person there got the job, which is why pilot racing, gig racing, became associated with the islands, and is now, of course, a big international sport. And we host the gig championships, world championships, every May. Not for the last 2 years, unfortunately, but next year, hopefully, fingers crossed. And so, yeah, I think water sports is currently quite a big thing. Of course, we've got the smallest football league in Britain with our 2 teams.